When a watch brand decides to use a gemstone as a dial, like this or this, it's a hit and a miss. You can either get it right or wrong. And when you get it right, I tell you what, you've got a gem of a watch in your hands. This brand from Germany, it's called Heinrich. It's actually a micro brand. I've reviewed quite a few of their watches. And these latest iterations of the Helicoprion, they've decided to use gemstones as dials. Now it's not all roses, because in the first review that I did of the Helicoprion, that was about 7 months ago, I struggled to find any faults or any room for improvement in that watch. Whereas with these watches, there's probably about 2 or 3 things I want to speak about in my gripe section, and you might not agree with me with 1 or 2, but whatever the case, they're lovely watches. They're not inexpensive, but I also think that they're batting way above their price point. So without further ado, let's check out these offerings from Heinrich, the Helicoprion Stone. Now, I didn't make it a secret that I liked the original Helicoprion. I think it was a really well-made watch. It sat well on the wrist, and they've done something different with this design. The Helicoprion basically was the dial, very reminiscent of certain watches of the past, and Heinrich incorporated it with different color tones, with different colors in their own watch, and I think they did very well by drawing from inspiration from the past. Now, with this particular model, they've included that Helicoprion pattern on the case back. Nicely etched in, so in keeping with theme, these watches come under the same banner. Now, you saw the pop-up. This video is sponsored by Heinrich, so I will of course leave a link in the description section. If these 2 watches interest you, feel free to check them out. And looking closely at the specs of the watch, I measure a case diameter of 40mm with a case height of 13.5. That lug to lug is 48mm and a lug width of 20. Now, the crown is a 6.9mm signed screw down crown. The watch offers 200 meters of water resistance, and the total weight on the supplied bracelet sized to my 18cm wrist, I measure exactly 155 grams. Now, although the specs say that this is a 40mm watch, it actually wears smaller. Because of the bezel size and that dial, it pretty much looks like a 38mm. And the comfort and wearability on this bracelet has also been extremely comfortable. Now, the Beads of Rice bracelet has a combination of high polished and brushed steel links. And if you look at it, it drops straight down. So the articulation's very good. It's got screw pins, quick release end links with an internal on-the-fly adjustment clasp. The bracelet itself tapers from 20mm down to 17.9. Now, for me, there's 2 heroes in these watches, and one of them is those dials. As I mentioned, they're genuine gemstones. The lapis lazuli, as I've got here in my hands, as well as carnelian. And the beauty of using gemstones, that each watch is going to be unique. You know you're going to get an individual watch. The elements that are on this dial are going to look different to the next watch. And that's just the nature of the gemstone. Now, the second hero on this watch for me is that crystal. It's a box dome sapphire, and it features a pronounced curve. And in doing so, it actually adds some really nice character to this watch. There's anti-reflective coating on both sides. And as far as clarity goes and legibility, these crystals have been doing a really good job. Now, if I turn the watch over, you can see that solid case back with the buzzsaw pattern, the Helicoprion. And each of these case backs has a serial number up to 100. So there's 50 watches of each gemstone variant. And hiding behind that case back is a Swiss-made Sellita SW200. It's an elaborate grade, it's regulated to 4 positions, and both of these watches on the time graph have been running between 1 and 2 seconds per day. Now, if we turn the lights off, both watches offer Swiss Superluminova BGW9, and the application is very good. In fact, I like that they've included a small lume plot underneath the date complication at 6. It seems to balance out that watch quite nicely. And for a sports watch with 200 meters of water resistance, that's offering really nice lume. Now, before I get onto any gripes or room for improvement, what's the price? Well, the watches come in at €974. Which converted is about 1,600 Australian or just over 1,000 USD. And that's not cheap by any means. But I want to share something about that in my gripe section. And the first thing I want to say is that I struggle to find any issues in the original Helicoprion, any room for improvement. But in these watches here, I've got an observation I want to share with you. The height of the watch has increased from the original from 13mm to 13.5. That's what I measure, 13.5 on both of these watches. And I couldn't understand why. So I had a good close look at that crystal, and the crystal on these watches are slightly more domed than the originals. The original was a little bit flatter. Now that's not a bad thing, because the look of that dial through that crystal is superb, but the drawback is that you've added 0.5 millimeter of height. Now 13mm to 13.5, do you experience that on the wrist? And for me, no, because it's really right at the tip of that glass, in the center, and in real life scenarios it doesn't come into play. But mentioning it for you guys so you know, the crystal on this is slightly more domed. I actually prefer it. I think it looks superb. And as I mentioned, that's one of the heroes of this watch alongside that dial. They seem to complement one another beautifully. The second thing that I want to mention is the fact that there's only 50 watches of each dial variant. Now that could be seen as a point of contention here. Do we only have 100 watches because of the supply of the stones, or the fact that Heinrich just decided to only make 100 pieces all up? Whatever the case, the final products are really well executed, but it would have been nice to not limit the supply, because I think the watch's design and the dial layout and the quality of those gemstones are really batting above their price point. And speaking of that price point, €974 is not inexpensive. But before we go down the road of saying, well, there's plenty of other competition at that price point, I've got to tell you guys, these two watches, especially the orange one, is sublime in its execution. Its look, with the natural brown hues and subtle orange coming off that dial, is a really pleasing visual experience. The build quality on both watches is beyond reproach. The accuracy of those Labrador grade Solitas, again, also running very healthily. So overall, even though the price might seem high to some, I feel that the vibe that I'm getting from these watches is something I usually expect from much higher priced major brands. It seems to be achieved here as a watch that's made in Germany, and it just feels like it's actually made really well, if that makes sense. And my last room for improvement, if you notice the 200 meters, the printing on the actual lapis dial, it seems to be missing a little bit of its font. Now I do believe that the blue one is a pre-production version. Whether that's an oversight, I don't know, but just mentioning it as an observation. So there's no need for me to tell you which is my favourite. I've always been a huge fan of orange watches, and when the orange dial is from a natural formation of a carnelian stone, it really doesn't get much better than that. I hope you enjoyed the review, guys. Some really impressive pieces from Heinrich, not inexpensive, very unique, but also a bit of a bummer that a watch so nice is limited in number and really is calling for unlimited production, especially when it looks this good. Thanks for watching. Be well, be safe, continue to enjoy the hobby and whatever's on your wrist at the moment, and we'll see you in the next one.